The chandeliers glittered above the dining hall, scattering gold light across marble floors polished like mirrors. Waiters in crisp uniforms flowed between tables, their movements rehearsed, almost theatrical. At table 7, near the fountain centerpiece where only VIPs were seated, the billionaire Richard Caldwell adjusted his cufflinks and glanced toward the approaching waitress. Her name was Maya, a black waitress, young but carrying herself with an air of quiet discipline. Tonight, though, every step she took was uneven. The small knee brace beneath her black slacks squeaked faintly, a reminder of an old injury she hadn't yet fully healed from. Balanced carefully on her tray was a tower of crystal glasses filled with Bordeaux, trembling slightly with each step. From across the table, Richard's companion leaned closer and smirked. "Is she limping?" he whispered loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. Richard chuckled, the kind of laugh that carried entitlement. "First-class service, yet they send us someone who can barely walk straight," he said, his voice dripping with amusement. His friends at the table broke into polite chuckles, careful not to laugh too loudly but enough to sting. Maya didn't falter. She reached the table, placed the glasses down gently, and straightened her posture. "Good evening, sir. Your Chateau Margaux 2010. Would you like me to pour?" Her voice was even, steady, an anchor against the ridicule hanging in the air. Richard raised a brow, leaning back with deliberate arrogance. "Tell me, dear," he said, swirling an empty glass between his fingers, "does carrying drinks count as rehabilitation for your condition?" His words echoed just a beat too long, making the silence around the table heavy. A couple at a nearby booth turned their heads, uncomfortable. One of the junior waiters froze mid-step, eyes darting to Maya, unsure if he should intervene. But Maya only met Richard's gaze with calmness that unsettled him more than any retort could. "Sir," she said, her lips forming the faintest smile. Sometimes what looks like weakness is just the weight of persistence. The chuckles stopped. Even the fountain splash seemed louder in the pause that followed. Richard blinked, his smirk wavering as if he hadn't expected a direct answer from someone he thought beneath him. For a moment, no one at the table spoke. Glasses hovered mid-air, forks paused above plates. And then Maya leaned closer, lowering her voice so it carried just enough to reach him and the people listening in. "My father used to say," she continued softly, "the real test of power is how you treat the ones who serve you." Her words struck sharper than crystal breaking. The entire table fell silent, guests from nearby seats exchanging looks of surprise. Richard's fingers tightened around his glass, but his voice, when it came, had lost some of its playful edge. "Well," he muttered, clearing his throat, "that's one way to see it." Maya straightened, adjusted the tray against her hip, and gave a small nod. "It's the only way that lasts, sir." With that, she turned and limped gracefully toward the next table. All eyes followed her, not in pity, but in a dawning recognition that something important had just happened. Richard shifted in his chair, suddenly uncomfortable under the silent judgment of those around him. And this was only the beginning. Richard Caldwell's companions leaned back uneasily, their laughter long gone. The words Maya had left behind clung to the air like smoke after a fire. A waiter at the far corner whispered to another, "Did you hear that?" The second nodded, pretending to polish a spoon. Even the violinist in the corner seemed to slow her bow across the strings, her melody softer, cautious. Richard forced a chuckle, determined to regain control of the atmosphere. "You all take life far too seriously," he declared, waving his hand as though brushing away her words. "She's just a waitress." But his tone betrayed a hint of irritation, and his friends exchanged glances, sensing the shift. Meanwhile, Maya carried her empty tray toward the kitchen. Each step was careful, deliberate, her limp noticeable but dignified. Behind the kitchen doors, steam hissed, pots clattered, and the head chef barked orders. Yet when Maya entered, the noise hushed for a second. The younger servers who had overheard what happened looked at her with a mix of admiration and concern. "You shouldn't talk back to people like him," whispered Carlos, a busboy barely 18. "That man owns half the city." Maya set the tray down gently, then placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Respect doesn't check bank accounts, Carlos. If I let them take mine, what lesson would that teach you?" The boy's eyes widened. He nodded, though worry lingered. Out in the dining hall, Richard was trying to recover his usual air of dominance. "Where's the manager?" he demanded. "I want a word about the quality of service." Moments later, the restaurant's manager, Mr. Hayes, approached the table, wringing his hands. A nervous man in his 50s, Hayes lived in perpetual fear of upsetting wealthy patrons. He bowed slightly. "Good evening, Mr. Caldwell. Is there an issue?" "Yes," Richard snapped. "Your waitress, limping around, mouthing off like some philosopher?" "I came here for dinner, not a lecture." Hayes glanced around. Several guests were watching. He lowered his voice. "Of course, sir. I apologize for any inconvenience. I'll address it." But before Hayes could retreat, a woman at the adjacent table spoke up. She was elegant, silver-haired, with the confidence of someone unafraid of reputations. "Excuse me, but I found the young lady's words rather refreshing," she said, her voice steady. Her husband beside her nodded in agreement. Richard's face tightened. He wasn't used to being challenged, certainly not in public. Hayes stammered, torn between appeasing the billionaire and respecting the other guests. He excused himself quickly, retreating toward the kitchen, his mind racing. Inside, he found Maya calmly polishing cutlery. "Maya," he hissed, pulling her aside. "Do you realize who that is? Richard Caldwell could buy this restaurant 10 times over. You can't—" She looked up unflinching. "Then perhaps he should learn that ownership doesn't excuse disrespect." Hayes froze. For a moment, he didn't see a waitress before him, but someone far more composed than himself. He opened his mouth to scold her again, but stopped when he noticed something glinting in her apron pocket. A staff badge with a subtle gold border. Not the standard silver everyone else wore. He frowned. "Where did you get that badge?" Maya slipped it back into her pocket. "It was given to me when I first started. A reminder of why I'm here." Her tone was calm, but there was something in her eyes Hayes couldn't place, an authority that unsettled him. Before he could press further, another waiter rushed in, breathless. "Mr. Hayes, the Caldwell table. It's escalating. He's demanding a replacement server, or he says he'll leave and call the press." Hayes paled. The last thing the restaurant needed was bad publicity from a billionaire. He turned to Maya. "Stay back here. I'll handle this." But Maya shook her head. "No, Mr. Hayes, I'll take the next round. Some truths are only taught face to face." Hayes stared at her in disbelief, but something in her calm defiance made him step aside. She lifted another tray, this time with bottles of champagne prepared for Caldwell's table, and began walking back into the storm she had left behind. All eyes turned as Maya emerged once more. Richard leaned back in his chair, smirk reassembled like armor. "Ah," he sneered, "the philosopher returns." Maya stopped at the head of the table, set the tray down with impeccable grace, and looked him in the eye. "Not a philosopher, sir," she said quietly, her voice carrying just enough for surrounding tables to hear. "Just someone who refuses to let dignity be trampled under fine shoes." The room held its breath. Even Richard's friends no longer laughed. Something was shifting and fast. For a long moment, Richard simply stared, caught between outrage and something he couldn't name. The clink of silverware and hushed whispers filled the hall, but the weight of Maya's words pressed down heavier than the chandeliers above them. A waiter standing near the bar muttered under his breath, "She's braver than all of us." His colleague nodded, too cautious to say more. Richard finally leaned forward, his smile tight, brittle. "Dignity?" he scoffed. "Dear, I could buy every ounce of dignity in this room with a signature." He snapped his fingers for effect. "And people like you would still be carrying my drinks." The words cut through the air. A few gasps slipped from nearby tables. The silver-haired woman who had spoken earlier shook her head, visibly disgusted. Even Richard's own companions shifted uneasily in their seats, embarrassed to be associated with him. Maya didn't flinch. She poured the champagne into his glass, steady despite her limp, then set the bottle back on the tray. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the golden liquid. "Respect isn't for sale, Mr. Caldwell," she replied softly. "And the more you try to buy it, the less of it you seem to have." The room went utterly still. Richard's jaw tightened. He raised the glass as if to drink, then slammed it back down, droplets of champagne spilling onto the tablecloth. "Manager!" he barked, Mr. Hayes appeared almost instantly, sweat beading his forehead. "Yes, sir. What can I want her gone," Richard said, pointing directly at Maya. "Tonight. Fired. If she's still here by the end of this meal, I'll make sure every investor knows this place values insolence over service." Hayes froze. His hands trembled. Losing Caldwell's favor could ruin the restaurant's reputation, but firing Maya in front of a room full of witnesses who'd just seen her stand with grace? That could backfire just as badly. Before Hayes could speak, the silver-haired woman rose from her table. "Excuse me," she said, her voice calm but firm. "This young woman has shown more dignity in 10 minutes than you have in a lifetime, Mr. Caldwell." Gasps rippled. Phones discreetly lifted. Several diners had begun recording. Richard's face flushed crimson. "Sit down, madam. This isn't your concern." "On the contrary," the woman replied, "it's everyone's concern when power is used to humiliate instead of uplift." Maya stood quietly, not intervening, her expression serene. But her presence at Richard's side made his rage burn hotter. He gestured sharply at Hayes again. "Do it! Fire her!" Hayes opened his mouth, but then he noticed something. A shadow at the entrance. A tall man in a tailored navy suit flanked by 2 assistants had just walked in. His presence shifted the energy of the room instantly. The maitre d' rushed to greet him with nervous bows. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Is that—" "Yes, it's him." Hayes swallowed hard. The man approaching was none other than Alexander Rowan, majority stakeholder of the restaurant chain. A billionaire in his own right, and Richard Caldwell's business rival. Rowan's gaze swept the room before settling on the tense scene at table 7. His eyes narrowed at the sight of Maya standing with her tray, Richard fuming in his chair. "Interesting," Rowan said as he approached, his voice carrying effortlessly. "I came here for dinner. Instead, I find a spectacle." Richard stiffened. "Alexander, this isn't—" Rowan raised a hand, silencing him. His eyes turned to Maya. "Miss, are you all right?" Maya nodded politely. "Perfectly fine, sir. Thank you." Rowan studied her for a beat longer, then turned back to Richard. "Funny thing, Caldwell. You spend your fortune chasing respect, while this young woman earns it with nothing but her words." The room erupted in murmurs. Phones kept recording. Richard's smirk was gone now, replaced with the twitch of a man cornered. And Maya? She simply shifted her weight off her bad knee, steadying herself with the tray, ready for whatever came next. Because the night was far from over. The dining hall seemed to hold its breath. Chandeliers flickered faintly as Alexander Rowan stopped at the edge of Richard's table, his shadow stretching across the linen like a verdict waiting to be read. Diners leaned subtly forward, drawn in by the gravity of 2 billionaires colliding in public. Richard forced a laugh, but it came out hollow. "Alexander, don't mistake a simple service issue for something grander. This waitress overstepped, that's all. I was resolving it." Rowan's eyes flicked to Maya, then back to Richard. His tone was cool, almost surgical. Resolving it? By mocking her limp? By threatening her job in front of half the city's elite? He tilted his head. "That's not resolution, Caldwell. That's theater. And poor theater at that." A ripple of agreement ran through the guests. Phones angled higher, recording every second. Richard's face flushed deeper. "You have no idea what was said." "I heard enough when I walked in," Rowan cut in. His voice carried the authority of someone used to boardrooms bending to his will. "And I know what I see now. A young woman standing straighter, even with a limp, than the man across from her with all his wealth." The silver-haired woman at the adjacent table clasped her husband's hand, whispering. Finally, someone said it. Mr. Hayes hovered nearby, wringing his hands. He opened his mouth to defend Caldwell, but Rowan's sharp glance pinned him silent. Hayes dropped his gaze to the floor. Maya remained still, tray tucked against her hip. "Sir," she said softly to Rowan, "please don't trouble yourself on my account." But Rowan shook his head. "Miss, dignity deserves witnesses. Tonight you've reminded everyone here what it looks like. That is no small thing." The words landed like a gavel. Richard clenched his jaw, desperate to reclaim ground. "You think this will earn you points, Alexander? She's a waitress, a forgettable face. Tomorrow no one will remember her name." Maya turned to him then, her voice quiet but firm. "You're wrong, Mr. Caldwell. People always remember how you made them feel. And tonight?" She let the pause linger. eyes sweeping across the guests who now stared at Richard with open disdain. "They'll remember you." The silence that followed was devastating. Richard shifted, tugging at his collar. He tried to laugh again, but it only deepened the sense of his unraveling. Rowan leaned forward slightly, his words deliberate. "Careful, Caldwell. In this city, reputations travel faster than fortunes, and tonight yours is sprinting out the door." A murmur of agreement filled the hall. Guests whispered, recording, some even nodding toward Maya in quiet respect. Richard slammed his palm on the table, rattling the silverware. "Enough! I won't be humiliated by a..." He stopped himself just in time, his mouth hanging open, but the damage was done. Everyone knew the word he had nearly spoken. Maya met his eyes, her voice steady as stone. "Then stop humiliating yourself." The room erupted, not in laughter, but in the soft, astonished exhale of people witnessing a truth that could not be unsaid. Richard Caldwell, a man who owned towers, stocks, and empires, sat shrinking under the weight of a waitress's calm. And Maya? She adjusted her tray, her limp unchanged, her dignity untouchable. But the night had only begun to unravel. For Caldwell, for Rowan, and for everyone who thought they knew who truly held power in that hall. Richard's fingers drummed against the table, his composure cracking like porcelain under heat. He leaned toward his companions, searching for support, but none of them met his eye. One cleared his throat, another fiddled with a napkin. Silence spoke louder than loyalty. Across the hall, whispers rippled. "Did you hear what she told him?" He almost said it out loud. "It's all on camera." Phones stayed raised, small red dots of recording lights blinking like watchful eyes. "Unbelievable," Richard muttered, trying to force a laugh. "A room full of sheep applauding a waitress. Do you not realize who I am?" Maya steadied the tray against her hip, her limp pronounced as she shifted weight, yet her presence only grew taller. "Yes, sir," she answered softly. "We all see who you are. That's the problem." Her words landed with surgical precision. A couple at the next table applauded quietly before catching themselves. Rowan's lips curved into the faintest smirk. Richard's bravado faltered. He turned on Hayes, the manager hovering nearby. "Well, fire her, now!" Hayes' face glistened with sweat. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, his eyes darting toward Rowan, then to the crowd, then back at Maya. Finally, he whispered, "Sir, I can't," Richard snapped. "Can't? You work for me." "No," Rowan interjected smoothly. "He works for the board. And last I checked, Caldwell, your shares don't outweigh mine." His tone was even, but the dagger beneath was unmistakable. A wave of murmurs surged through the hall. Richard paled, realizing the public battlefield he had walked into. For the first time, Maya stepped back from the spotlight, her calm voice redirecting attention. "This isn't about ownership," she said, scanning the room. "It's about respect. If a room like this, full of power, wealth, and influence, cannot respect a limp and a tray, then all that power is worthless." The hall quieted, her words reverberating under the chandeliers. Richard's jaw worked soundlessly. He felt the tide slipping, his empire shrinking to the size of a tablecloth. One of his friends finally stood, muttering, "Richard, this isn't worth it," before walking out. Another followed. The billionaire sat surrounded by empty seats. Rowan leaned forward, voice low but audible to all. "Seems the room has voted. Dignity wins tonight." The guests, one by one, began to clap. Soft at first, then louder, a chorus that filled the air. Not for Rowan, not against Caldwell, but for Maya, the waitress with the limp, who had stood unshaken in the face of power. Richard shoved back his chair, the scrape echoing. His eyes burned with humiliation, but he said nothing more. He stormed past the watching crowd, their applause following him out like a verdict he could not escape. Maya exhaled, a quiet release of the weight she'd carried all evening. She looked at Rowan, who inclined his head in respect, then turned back to her tray. Work was not finished, dignity not lost. She moved on, serving the next table with the same steady grace. But everyone in that room knew the night had already been served. Richard's departure left the dining hall humming with disbelief. His empty chair stood like a monument to arrogance undone. Guests whispered in clusters, their voices carrying both shock and exhilaration. He really walked out. Over a waitress. Maya didn't bask in the attention. She returned to the kitchen, setting her tray down with the same care she'd shown all evening. Carlos, the young busboy, nearly sprinted toward her. "Maya, they were clapping for you. Did you hear? You shut down Richard Caldwell." She smiled faintly, adjusting the strap of her apron. "I didn't shut him down, Carlos. His own words did that. I only refused to carry them." Behind her, Mr. Hayes entered, wiping his forehead with a napkin. His voice was strained. "Maya, you don't understand. That man could ruin us. He has friends on every board, papers in every city." Rowan stepped through the swinging doors before Hayes could finish. The kitchen stilled. Even the chef lowered his ladle. Rowan's presence filled the cramped space with the gravity of a boardroom. "Mr. Caldwell won't be ruining anyone tonight," Rowan said evenly. "He's already ruined himself. Half this room recorded his tantrum. By morning, his words will spread further than his wealth ever could." Hayes looked stricken. "So the restaurant? We'll be fine," Rowan interrupted. He shifted his gaze to Maya. "Because of her." Maya shook her head quickly. "Sir, I only did my job." Rowan's eyes softened just slightly. "No. You reminded people what dignity looks like when money tries to buy it." He reached into his jacket, producing a sleek black envelope. "I intended to meet with the chain's top staff next week, but after tonight, I'd like to extend the offer now. Management trainee program, full sponsorship, if you'll take it." Gasps rippled through the kitchen. Carlos's eyes nearly bulged. Hayes's mouth opened, closed, then opened again without sound. Maya hesitated. Her hand touched the gold-edged staff badge hidden in her pocket. She thought of her younger brother at home, textbooks spread across the kitchen table, waiting for news of whether his sister's long shifts would keep their dreams afloat. Finally, she met Rowan's eyes. "I'll accept," she said quietly, "on one condition." Rowan raised a brow. "And that is?" "That respect isn't only spoken when cameras are watching," she replied. "If I am to lead here one day, then it must start in the back, where no one records." A silence fell, heavier than applause. Then Rowan gave a single nod. "Spoken like a true leader." In the dining hall, the silver-haired woman stood to leave, slipping her card discreetly to a maitre d'. "Please tell that young waitress," she said, "that if she ever needs an ally, she has one." Meanwhile, Richard Caldwell's name was already spreading online. A diner had uploaded the first clip within minutes, his mocking words about rehabilitation through serving drinks. Comments piled up with lightning speed. By midnight, his empire would feel the tremors of one careless night. But Maya, walking back into the hall with a fresh tray, didn't think of empires or reputations. She only thought of the next guest waiting to be served, and of a promise to her brother that tomorrow would be brighter than today. The applause had ended, but the lesson lingered in the air like perfume, impossible to ignore. By midnight, the restaurant's chandeliers were dark, but the story hadn't gone to sleep. Clips of Richard Caldwell slamming his glass, sneering at Maya's limp, and demanding she be fired had flooded social media. Hashtags pulsed on every feed. Respect is not for sale. Waitress with dignity. Caldwell exposed. Within hours, millions had watched. In his penthouse suite, Richard paced furiously, phone buzzing nonstop. His PR advisor's voice crackled through the speaker. "It's everywhere. Investors are calling. They don't want to be associated with this. You need a statement, now." Richard clenched his fists. "A statement for a waitress? This will blow over." But when he glanced at the muted television, he saw the silver-haired woman from the restaurant speaking live on a news panel. Her words cut deep. "Power without respect is worthless." That young woman showed more leadership than Caldwell has in years. Richard turned away, but his reflection in the glass wall looked smaller than he remembered. Meanwhile, Maya walked home through quiet city streets, her limp slowed by the long shift. The night air smelled of rain. Carlos had begged to walk with her, but she'd insisted she was fine. The applause, the offer from Rowan, the chaos, she carried it all silently like the trays she'd balanced all evening. Her phone buzzed, a message from her brother. "Saw you on Twitter. Sis, you're a hero. I'm proud." Maya smiled faintly, stopping beneath a street lamp. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel it. The pride, the relief, the weight of dignity defended. Then she tucked the phone away. Morning would come and she still had work to do. At dawn, the city's papers hit the stands. Headlines screamed, "Billionaire humiliated by waitress's grace." Caldwell empire shaken after public meltdown. Investors pulled out of 2 deals before breakfast. His name trended not for success, but for shame. In contrast, the restaurant phone rang endlessly with requests. People wanted to dine where Maya worked, to meet the waitress who had stood taller than wealth. Rowan, reading the papers from his corner office, allowed himself the smallest of smiles. But even he knew this wasn't about him. The city wasn't rallying around a rival billionaire, they were rallying around dignity. And at the center of it all, Maya prepared her uniform once more, her limp unchanged, her resolve stronger than ever. Tomorrow night, she would return to the restaurant, but she would not return the same. The restaurant buzzed before the doors even opened. Photographers waited on the sidewalk, flashes primed. Diners called weeks in advance, begging for a reservation. Not to taste the food, but to see her. Inside, Maya adjusted her apron in the staff room, ignoring the noise outside. Carlos nearly bounced beside her. "Maya, you're famous. People are chanting your name online. Rowan's office called again. They said you'll be fast-tracked for management." She tied the final knot on her apron. "Carlos, I'm still a waitress tonight. People will be hungry, and the glasses won't carry themselves." When she walked into the dining hall, conversation dimmed. Guests turned, some even stood, offering soft applause. Maya bowed her head politely and began her rounds, tray steady against her hip. At table 9, the silver-haired woman from that unforgettable night smiled warmly. "You reminded us all what respect means," she told Maya. "Don't ever forget it." Maya's voice was gentle. "Respect only matters if we practice it every day. That's all I tried to do." The evening flowed like music. No outbursts, no arrogance, only the quiet awe of people watching dignity in motion. Even Mr. Hayes, once timid, moved with newfound backbone, refusing to let any guest speak down to the staff. Change had begun to ripple from the back of the house to the very front. As Maya cleared a table near the fountain, a group of young diners stopped her. "Miss, we saw your story," one said. "It gave us courage. We've been afraid to speak up at work, but after you—" He trailed off, but his eyes gleamed with hope. Maya placed a hand on the table, steady. "Courage isn't about winning. It's about refusing to bow when you know the ground is wrong." Phone snapped discreet pictures. Her words, like before, began their own quiet journey into the world. By closing time, the staff gathered around her. Even the head chef, usually stern, offered a nod. "You carried more than trays this week," he said. "You carried all of us." Maya looked around the room, at the tables polished to a shine, at the team who now stood taller. Her limp was still there, but it no longer felt heavy. "Maybe dignity is contagious," she whispered, almost to herself. And in that moment, she realized what happened with Richard Caldwell wasn't just an incident, it was a seed. One that would grow far beyond chandeliers and marble floors. If you believe stories like Maya's should be heard, don't just watch, help them travel further. Like this video, subscribe, and share it. Dignity deserves witnesses, and your click makes sure it never gets silenced. 6 months later, the city skyline shimmered with spring sunlight, but Richard Caldwell's name had lost its shine. Once headlining finance magazines, he now appeared on gossip blogs and business exposés. 2 of his largest partners had severed ties. His stock prices slid week by week. The viral video still haunted him, played at universities, dissected in leadership seminars, even used in corporate ethics training. In the penthouse he once filled with parties, only silence lingered. Richard scrolled through article after article. Caldwell meltdown teaches Fortune 500 a lesson. From power to pariah, the fall of a billionaire. His reflection in the screen looked older, smaller, and utterly alone. Across town, the restaurant buzzed with a different energy. Maya, no longer in a server's apron, walked through the dining hall wearing a tailored jacket and a slim badge embossed with manager trainee. Guests recognized her instantly, but it wasn't fame they noticed. It was the quiet authority she carried. Carlos hurried up, now a full-time waiter. "Maya, we just filled another booking, 2 weeks solid. They're saying people are coming just to see you lead." She smiled steady. Then let's give them more than a show. Let's give them an example. Under her guidance, the staff moved like a family. Shifts ran smoother, respect became habit, and no one dared belittle a server again. Even Hayes, once timid, had grown firmer, thanking Maya privately for teaching him backbone. One evening, as Maya was finishing reports in the office, a letter arrived. It was from the silver-haired woman who had stood up for her that night. You reminded us that true class is not worn but lived. Never let anyone convince you otherwise. Maya folded the letter carefully, tucking it into her journal beside her father's old sayings. And Richard? He watched a news segment from his dim apartment. Maya was being honored at a community leadership event. The audience applauded as she spoke. Power is temporary. Dignity is forever. That's the lesson I learned carrying trays with a limp. For the first time in months, Richard's eyes lowered. Not with rage, but with the weight of recognition. The city had chosen its story. Not the fall of a billionaire, but the rise of a waitress who proved that dignity can outlast empires. The restaurant glowed softly at closing hour, its chandeliers dimmed, the marble floors quiet after another sold-out evening. Maya stepped out into the night air, her jacket draped across her arm. The city's hum surrounded her, but she walked slowly, carefully, her limp unchanged. Carlos called after her from the doorway. "Good night, Manager Maya." His voice carried pride more than playfulness. She turned, waved, and smiled. On the sidewalk, Maya paused beneath the glow of a street lamp. She touched the gold-edged staff badge she still carried in her pocket. It had once felt like just a uniform pin, but now it symbolized every step she had taken. Bruised, limping, but unbroken. She remembered her father's words. The real test of power is how you treat the ones who serve you. Tonight, she finally understood. Those words weren't just for billionaires, they were for her too. Because now, she served not only food, but an example. Across town, Richard Caldwell sat in the dark, scrolling endlessly through clips of the night that had undone him. Each replay was another reminder of the lesson he had refused to learn, and each replay made Maya's calm voice echo louder in his silence. Respect isn't for sale. Maya drew a deep breath of the cool night air, her lips curling into a genuine smile. The limp remained, but it no longer defined her. What defined her was the quiet strength that had carried her through mockery, through power plays, through the weight of wealth that thought it could crush her. And as she walked down the avenue, head held high, she knew her story would travel further than any empire of glass and steel. Because dignity, once seen, could never be unseen.